All right, today we are diving deep into a massive topic, the military might of the world's two biggest rivals, the United States and Russia. We're going to dig into the latest 2026 data and see how they really stack up head to head.
So let's just get right to it. The big question on everyone's mind. Who really comes out on top? Is it a slam dunk for one side, or is the real story a lot more complicated?
Okay, let's jump right in. First, we're going to look at that single top line number, the one that tries to answer that very question. So here it is, the Power Index score. And the thing you've got to remember is a lower score is better. You're aiming for 0. That's like perfect. And wow, look how close these two are. We're talking a separation of just 0.005 of a point. That is razor thin.
So, with that score, the United States officially takes the #1 spot in the global rankings.
And right on their heels, at number 2 out of 145 countries, you've got Russia. So yeah, we have an answer on paper, but that tiny gap in the scores, that tells you there's a much bigger, much more fascinating story hiding just beneath the surface. So to really get what's going on, we have to look past that #1 ranking. And you know what? There's no better place to start than in the sky, with air power.
And wow, the first thing that just jumps out at you here is the sheer scale of this difference. The U.S. has over 13,000 military aircraft. That's more than 3 times Russia's total. I mean, on paper, that looks like a total knockout.
But that leads to the big question, right? In modern war, is it just a numbers game? Does having more planes automatically mean you're better? Or is there a smarter way to look at this? Turns out there is. It's something called the True Value Rating, or TVR. And this is really clever. It doesn't just count the number of planes. It digs deeper, looking at the whole picture, how modern they are, their actual capabilities, their age, their readiness. It's just a much better way to gauge who's really got the edge.
And this table just lays it all out perfectly. Okay, so look at the column on the left. That's just counting planes. You see the U.S. Air Force at #1, sure. But then the U.S. Army is at #2, mostly because of all their helicopters. But now, look at the True Value Rating on the right. This is where it gets interesting. The U.S. Navy suddenly jumps up to the #2 spot. The U.S. Marine Corps even shows up in the top 5. Russia's Air Force, to its credit, holds that #3 spot in both lists. They're a serious force. But the real takeaway? Look how the U.S. just dominates the quality list, with 4 of the top 5 slots across different branches. That's telling.
Okay, so let's bring this fight down to the ground and out to sea, because if you thought the air was a clear win, well, things get a whole lot murkier from here on out.
When it comes to pure tank-on-tank strength, Russia actually has the advantage. We're talking nearly 1,000 more main battle tanks than the US. So if you're thinking about a classic armored punch, the numbers here give Russia a clear edge. But then you pull the camera back a bit. You look at all armored vehicles, the ones that carry the troops, support the tanks, the whole shebang. And suddenly the pendulum swings massively back to the US. It really shows you a different way of thinking. Russia's focus on that tank spearhead versus America's focus on overall mechanized support. Now, out on the open ocean, the ability to project power anywhere in the world, well, it pretty much comes down to this one staggering number, 11-1. That's the ratio of U.S. to Russian aircraft carriers. It is probably the single biggest strategic advantage in this entire comparison. But then, you go deep, beneath the waves, and you find this, a dead heat. Both the US and Russia operate exactly 66 submarines. It's this incredible, surprising tie, and it tells you that in the silent service, this is a fight between equals. All this talk of tanks and jets is great, but none of it moves, none of it fights without money and logistics. And that brings us to the real power behind the power, the engine that makes it all run. And right away, the difference in money is just huge. The U.S. defense budget is sitting at over $830 billion. That's almost 4 times what Russia spends. And that kind of money touches everything, from developing crazy new tech to simply giving your soldiers more training time. And this table, well, it really shows you what that money buys. It's the deep stuff, the logistical muscle. Just look at the numbers. Airports, the U.S. has way more, which means you can move troops and gear faster. The available labor force to build and maintain everything, double for the U.S. Miles of roadway, it's not even close. And then you get to purchasing power, the overall economic strength. It's a massive difference. This is the foundation that lets you fight a war far from home and keep it going.
Okay, so we've looked at the big scores, the planes, the tanks, the money behind it all. So what's the bottom line here? What's the final takeaway?
You know, I think one of the sources we looked at really nails it with this quote. It's this perfect reminder that just counting up your toys isn't the whole game. Real strength is a mix of everything. The gear, sure, but also how good that gear is, how well trained your people are, and having a smart plan. So let's just quickly recap the big points. Yes, the US has that #1 spot, but that main score is super close. We also saw that raw numbers can be deceiving. It's all about quality and capability, not just quantity. Russia absolutely has real strengths, especially on the ground with things like tanks. But when you look at the whole picture, that massive American lead in logistics, in economics, and in the ability to project power globally, that's the real game changer.
And that kind of leaves us with one last thing to think about. We spent all this time comparing tanks and planes and ships, but warfare is evolving so fast, right? We're talking about cyber attacks, space warfare, swarms of drones. The very definition of power is changing right before our eyes. So it makes you wonder, for how much longer will these old school metrics even be the ones that decide who wins?